Picture this. You're a physicist working late in your laboratory. You're running calculations that should be routine, predictable, safe. The equations on your whiteboard describe reality itself. They are the fundamental rules that govern everything from the smallest particles to the largest galaxies. These are the laws you've spent decades mastering. They are the mathematical truths that have guided human understanding for over a century. But then something goes wrong. The numbers don't add up. The results contradict themselves. Your most basic assumptions about the nature of existence begin to crumble before your eyes. You double-check your work, triple-check it, and bring in colleagues to verify what you're seeing. But the conclusion remains the same. Reality itself appears to be broken. Physicists are discovering quantum paradoxes so profound and so fundamentally disturbing that they're questioning everything. They are questioning everything we thought we knew about the universe. These aren't just abstract mathematical curiosities. These are experimental results that suggest our entire conception of reality might be nothing more than a comforting illusion. Today we're going to explore the quantum paradox that's keeping scientists awake at night. The discovery that's forcing them to abandon cherished beliefs about the nature of existence itself. What you're about to learn will challenge everything you think you know about reality, consciousness, and the very fabric of space and time. Now prepare yourselves. We begin. For nearly a century, physicists have been wrestling with what they call the measurement problem. It sounds technical, almost boring, but don't let the name fool you. This is the crisis that threatens to unravel our entire understanding of the universe. Here's what makes it so disturbing. In quantum mechanics, particles don't exist in definite states until they're observed. Before a measurement is made, they exist in what scientists call a superposition. They occupy all possible states simultaneously. An electron can spin both clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time. A photon can travel through multiple paths simultaneously. A particle can literally be in several places at once. This isn't just a theory. We've proven it experimentally thousands of times. The math works perfectly. Our quantum technologies all depend on these bizarre quantum properties. These technologies range from the lasers in your Blu-ray player to the microchips in your computer to the magnets in an MRI machine. But here's where things get terrifying. When we actually measure these quantum systems, when our instruments interact with them, something impossible happens. All those multiple simultaneous ghostly states instantly collapse into just one definite classical outcome. The electron suddenly spins only clockwise. The photon picks a single path. The particle materializes in one specific location. It's as if reality itself is forced to make a choice the moment we look at it. The problem is nobody can explain why this happens. The mathematical equations that describe quantum mechanics with breathtaking precision, like the Schrödinger equation, don't include any mechanism for this collapse. According to the math, particles should remain in superposition forever. They should evolve smoothly through a landscape of possibilities. But they don't. And that discrepancy, that gaping conceptual hole at the very heart of our most successful theory of nature, has created a crisis. It is a crisis that scientists are only now beginning to confront publicly. Think about what this means. We have a scientific theory that can predict the behavior of quantum systems with an incredible, unparalleled precision. We can calculate probabilities, design technologies, and manipulate matter at the atomic level, but we have absolutely no idea what is actually happening when we make a measurement. Our most fundamental tool for understanding reality contains a mystery so profound that it calls into question whether an objective reality even exists. An objective reality existing independently of our observations. Some physicists, including pioneers like Eugene Wigner and John von Neumann, have proposed that consciousness itself plays a fundamental role. They propose it plays a fundamental role in quantum mechanics, that the act of a conscious observation is what somehow forces reality to choose a definite state. This is the moment a mind becomes aware of the outcome. But this suggestion is even more terrifying than the original problem. If consciousness determines reality, then what we think of as the objective physical universe might be nothing more than a projection of our own minds. Other scientists, in an attempt to avoid giving a special role to consciousness, suggest that all possible outcomes of a quantum measurement actually occur simultaneously, but they occur in separate parallel universes. This is the many worlds interpretation. Every quantum measurement, every coin flip at the subatomic level creates a branching point, a point where reality splits into multiple non-communicating versions. In this interpretation, there are infinite copies of you experiencing every possible outcome of every quantum event. Right now, in countless parallel universes, different versions of you are living completely different lives. These lives are based on the outcomes of quantum coin flips that happened years or even seconds ago. But even this mind-bending interpretation doesn't solve the fundamental problem. It just pushes the mystery deeper. Why do we experience only one branch of this reality? What determines which version of the multiverse we find ourselves in? The questions multiply faster than the answers. The terror isn't just philosophical. Recent experiments have made the measurement problem concrete, measurable, and utterly undeniable. A team of scientists at Griffith University in Australia have developed a paradox. This paradox is backed by a rigorous mathematical proof. It forces physicists to abandon one of three fundamental assumptions about reality. Their work demonstrates mathematically that these three basic beliefs about the universe cannot all be true simultaneously. First, there is the assumption that when we measure something, the result represents a single real event in the world. This seems painfully obvious, but quantum mechanics, with its superpositions, suggests it might be false. Second, there is the assumption that we as scientists can freely choose what experiments to perform. This allows for a genuine, unbiased, scientific investigation. This is the bedrock of the entire scientific method. And third, there is the assumption that information cannot travel faster than light. This is a cornerstone of Einstein's theory of relativity and our understanding of causality. Each of these assumptions appears completely reasonable. Most scientists consider them to be obviously true, the very foundation of a rational worldview. But the Griffith team has proven with mathematical certainty that if quantum mechanics applies to the observers themselves, then at least one of these cherished assumptions must be wrong. They've even performed experimental tests using entangled photons that confirm their theoretical predictions. This isn't just an abstract thought experiment. They have used entangled photons to demonstrate that the paradox is real, measurable, and logically undeniable. The implications are staggering and deeply unsettling. Either our measurements of the world do not reflect single real events, or we do not have the free will to choose our own experiments, or faster-than-light influences exist and are constantly propagating throughout the universe. Pick your poison, because reality requires you to abandon one of these fundamental tenets. The horror deepens when we consider what this means for the nature of scientific knowledge itself. Science as a process depends on the assumption that we can perform controlled experiments, and it depends on trusting the results to tell us something objective about the world. But if the very act of observation fundamentally changes what we are trying to measure, then the entire scientific method might be built on a foundation of quicksand. And if different observers can legitimately mathematically disagree about the outcomes of identical experiments, this brings us to one of the most disturbing developments in modern physics. The Wigner's friend paradox, originally conceived as a thought experiment in the 1960s, has now been experimentally verified. The setup involves nested observations. One scientist, let's call her Alice, makes a measurement on a quantum particle inside a sealed laboratory. At the same time, another scientist, Bob, stands outside the laboratory. He treats the entire lab, including Alice and her measuring device, as a single large quantum system. The results are deeply philosophically unsettling. The scientist inside the lab, Alice, opens her box and observes a definite outcome. Let's say she sees the particle spinning clockwise. She records this as a fact, but the scientist outside, Bob, who treats the entire lab as a quantum system, can, according to the same rules of quantum mechanics, mathematically demonstrate something. He can demonstrate that the particle, the measuring device, and even Alice herself remain in a state of superposition. Alice is simultaneously seeing the particle spinning both clockwise and counterclockwise. Both scientists are using the same established, experimentally verified quantum mechanical rules, but they reach diametrically opposed, contradictory conclusions about the same single physical event. Recent experiments at the University of Vienna have confirmed that this isn't just a theoretical problem. Real observers can genuinely disagree about the fundamental facts regarding the same quantum system. The experiment proves that there is no single objective outcome that is true for all observers. Reality itself appears to be observer-dependent. This is a conclusion so radical that it undermines the very notion of an objective external world. But the terror goes even deeper. These same experiments, when analyzed fully, have revealed that individuals cannot even trust their own past observations. The researchers proved that one's own knowledge from a previous measurement cannot be reliably used in a present calculation. Using it would lead to a logical contradiction. This suggests that not only is reality observer-dependent, but that individual observers cannot maintain a consistent, coherent knowledge about quantum systems over time. The implications of this attack, the very foundation of personal identity and our sense of a continuous experience. If you cannot trust your own memories of past quantum measurements, what does that say about the reliability of your consciousness itself? Are we living in a universe where even our own personal experiences are fundamentally unreliable, where the past is as fluid and undetermined as the future? These discoveries have forced physicists to confront what they call the hard problem of consciousness from a new and terrifying angle. Quantum mechanics seems to require conscious observers to function. They must collapse the wave function and create a definite reality. But consciousness itself remains completely mysterious. We don't understand what consciousness is, how it emerges from matter, or why it appears to play such a fundamental and seemingly impossible role, a role in determining the nature of physical reality. The measurement problem has been tormenting physicists for nearly a century. But recent theoretical and experimental developments have made it utterly impossible to ignore. As our quantum technologies become more sophisticated and our experiments more precise, the contradictions at the heart of quantum mechanics become more apparent. They become more measurable and more profoundly disturbing. We are approaching a crisis point in physics, a moment when our most successful and accurate scientific theory is revealing logical contradictions that threaten the entire scientific worldview. The solutions being proposed by serious physicists require abandoning the most basic assumptions about reality and about consciousness and causality that have guided human thinking for centuries. Some physicists suggest that we need entirely new mathematical frameworks, perhaps frameworks based on logics that allow for true contradictions to properly describe quantum mechanics. Others propose, in all seriousness, that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, as basic as mass or electric charge. Still others argue that we simply need to accept that an objective reality, one that exists independently of our observation of it, simply does not exist. But perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that all of these radical solutions might be correct simultaneously. That we are living in a universe so strange, so fundamentally alien to human intuition that our minds simply cannot grasp its true nature. That the comfortable, predictable, classical reality we experience every day is nothing more than a simplified, user-friendly approximation of something far more bizarre and unsettling. The quantum measurement problem isn't just a puzzle for physicists to solve. It's a window into the deepest mysteries of existence itself. And what we are seeing through that window is forcing us to question everything we thought we knew. We are questioning everything about reality, consciousness, and our own place in the universe. But this is just the beginning. The measurement problem, as disturbing as it is, represents only one facet of the quantum terror that's keeping scientists awake at night. There are other paradoxes, other experimental results, other theoretical predictions that suggest reality is far stranger and more frightening than we ever imagined. What happens when quantum mechanics is applied to black holes? What occurs when we try to understand the fundamental nature of space and time themselves? And what are the implications of recent discoveries that suggest the entire universe might be fundamentally unstable? What if it is capable of spontaneously destroying itself through purely quantum processes? The terror extends far beyond the confines of laboratory experiments. Deep in the heart of black holes, gravity becomes so intense that not even light can escape. There, quantum mechanics reveals its most nightmarish and reality-bending implications. For decades, physicists believed they had a basic, if incomplete, understanding of these cosmic monsters. Matter falls in, gets crushed to an infinite density at a central singularity, and disappears from our universe forever. It was a simple, brutal, and final story. But Stephen Hawking shattered that comfortable certainty. He did so in one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the 20th century. His calculations combined quantum field theory with Einstein's general relativity. They revealed that black holes are not entirely black. They emit a faint thermal glow now known as Hawking radiation. And through this process, they slowly evaporate over cosmic timescales until they vanish completely. This discovery should have been celebrated as a magnificent triumph of theoretical physics. Instead, it created what scientists now call the black hole information paradox, a contradiction so fundamental that it threatens to destroy our entire understanding of physical law itself. Here's the problem that is keeping physicists awake at night. When matter falls into a black hole, it carries information with it. The specific quantum state of every particle, every bit of data about its properties and its history, seemingly gets trapped forever. It is trapped behind the one-way membrane of the event horizon. But when the black hole evaporates through the emission of Hawking radiation, that radiation appears to be completely random. It appears to be thermal noise. It carries no information about what fell into the black hole in the first place. The information, it seems, just vanishes. This might sound like an abstract academic concern, but for a physicist, it is a catastrophe of the highest order. The conservation of information is one of the most fundamental bedrock principles in the entire universe. In every other physical process we have ever observed, information is always preserved. It might get scrambled, encrypted, or transformed into different forms, but it never truly, completely disappears. The laws of physics demand that if you know the current state of any system with perfect precision, you can in principle calculate its entire past and future. You can do so with complete accuracy. Black holes seem to violate this principle completely. They appear to be cosmic information destroyers. They erase the quantum fingerprints of everything that falls into them. If this is true, then the predictable deterministic universe that physics describes is an illusion. Causality itself breaks down when information can simply cease to exist. Recent research has proposed solutions that are somehow even more disturbing than the original problem. One leading hypothesis emerging from string theory suggests that space-time itself is quantum entangled. The very geometry of space and time emerges from deeper, more fundamental quantum connections that we don't yet understand. In this radical picture, the information that falls inside a black hole becomes deeply entangled. It becomes entangled with the structure of space-time outside the black hole. Think about what this means. Space and time might not be real in the way we think. They are the fundamental, seemingly passive stage on which all physical processes play out. They might be emergent properties of some deeper quantum mechanical structure, a vast network of entangled information that operates according to rules we haven't yet discovered. The distance between objects, the very flow of time, the three dimensions we move through, all of it could be illusions. It could be a holographic projection created by quantum entanglement patterns that exist outside of our normal experience. If this hypothesis is correct, then the information that falls into black holes isn't actually destroyed. It's encoded in tiny, imperceptible perturbations in the geometry of space-time itself. When the black hole evaporates, the information is preserved. It is preserved in the subtle quantum correlations between different regions of space and time. The universe maintains its precious information, but it does so only by making reality itself fundamentally quantum mechanical and perhaps holographic at its deepest level. Scientists find this possibility terrifying. It suggests that everything we think we know about the nature of space and time is fundamentally wrong. The solid, predictable classical framework that supports all of physics might be nothing more than a convenient approximation, an approximation that breaks down completely when we look too closely at the quantum foundations of reality. But even this mind-bending solution doesn't address the deepest horror, a horror that is hidden within the mathematics of quantum mechanics. There is a process so catastrophic, so utterly and completely destructive, that it could erase not just information, it could erase the entire universe itself. It is called false vacuum decay, and it represents the ultimate quantum nightmare. The idea is deceptively simple. Our entire universe, with its specific set of physical laws and fundamental constants, might be trapped. It might be trapped in what physicists call a false vacuum state. Like a ball balanced precariously in a shallow dip on the side of a very large hill, we appear to be stable, but we are actually in a profoundly precarious position. At any moment, without any warning, quantum mechanics could allow the universe to tunnel through the barrier. It could roll down to a lower energy, more stable state at the bottom of the hill. This isn't a gradual process. If a false vacuum decay begins, it creates an expanding bubble of altered space-time. This bubble travels outward at the speed of light. Inside this bubble, the fundamental constants of physics change. The forces that hold atoms together become different. The particles that make up matter transform into new alien forms. Everything we know, everything we are, everything that has ever existed in our universe would be instantly and completely annihilated. It would be replaced by a new universe with completely different physical laws. The most terrifying aspect of this is that the process is entirely random and unpredictable. Quantum mechanics allows for spontaneous tunneling events that could trigger a false vacuum decay at any moment, anywhere in the cosmos. There would be no warning, no way to prepare, no possibility of escape. The bubble of cosmic destruction would expand at the speed of light. So even if we could somehow detect it coming, we would be destroyed in the exact same instant that we received the information. Our final moment of awareness would be the moment we discovered our doom was upon us. Recent advances in quantum computing have made this theoretical horror more concrete and immediate. Scientists have successfully simulated false vacuum decay using quantum machines. They have created microscopic, harmless versions of the cosmic bubbles of death that could destroy everything. These simulations prove that the process is not just mathematically possible, It is physically realizable under the right conditions. The researchers describe a chilling experience watching these simulations unfold. They're not just studying abstract mathematics anymore. They're observing actual physical processes that mirror exactly what could happen to our universe at any moment. Each simulation is a miniature version of a cosmic annihilation, a practice run for the end of everything. What makes this even more disturbing is the realization that a false vacuum decay might have already occurred multiple times in our universe's own history. The Big Bang itself could have been the result of a false vacuum transition, a transition that reset the physical constants and created the specific reality we inhabit today. Previous versions of the universe might have been completely erased. These versions, with different laws of physics and different forms of matter and energy, might have left no trace of their existence behind. This possibility suggests that universes themselves are temporary ephemeral structures that spontaneously appear and disappear through quantum mechanical processes. That consciousness, life, stars, galaxies, everything we consider to be permanent and meaningful exists only in the brief, fragile intervals between these cosmic resets. We might be living in a universe that is already doomed. We might be counting down to an inevitable quantum apocalypse that will erase all evidence that we ever existed. The false vacuum decay scenario reveals something profound about the very nature of quantum mechanics. It's not just a theory about tiny particles behaving strangely. It's a description of fundamental processes that can operate on any scale, from the subatomic to the truly cosmic. The same bizarre quantum rules that govern the behavior of electrons in laboratory experiments also govern the ultimate stability of the entire universe. This deep connection between the microscopic and the cosmic is precisely what makes quantum mechanics so terrifying to scientists. The weird counterintuitive behaviors they observe in their laboratories are not confined to those specialized experimental conditions. They are expressions of universal fundamental principles that apply everywhere at all scales at all times. The strangeness of quantum mechanics isn't a curiosity. It is the fundamental nature of reality itself. But there's another quantum effect that is perhaps even more unsettling than a false vacuum decay. It is called the quantum Zeno effect. It demonstrates that the act of observation can literally freeze physical processes in time. Named after the ancient Greek paradoxes about motion, this effect shows that a frequent measurement can prevent a quantum system from evolving naturally. Here's how it works. A quantum system naturally evolves from one state to another over time. An unstable particle will decay. An excited atom will emit a photon. A quantum system will transition between different energy levels. But if you measure the system frequently enough, these natural processes simply stop occurring. The measurements effectively freeze the system in its original state. They prevent it from evolving according to the normal laws of physics. This isn't just a theory. Scientists have observed the quantum Zeno effect in dozens of different systems. They have used frequent measurements to prevent particle decay, to stop atomic transitions, and to freeze a quantum evolution in its tracks. The effect is real, measurable, and completely contradicts our intuitive understanding of how time and causality should work. The terrifying implication is that a conscious observation has the power to alter the flow of time itself. By choosing when and how often to measure a quantum system, an observer can control whether natural physical processes occur or not. This gives consciousness a kind of a godlike power over the evolution of a matter and an energy. It suggests that the boundary between a mind and a physical reality might be far more porous than we had ever imagined. Modern quantum physicists are now actively exploiting this effect to control quantum systems. They control them in ways that would have seemed like pure magic just decades ago. They use carefully timed measurements to manipulate the evolution of quantum computers. They use them to create exotic states of matter, and even to attempt to build quantum technologies that operate by preventing natural processes from occurring. The widespread observation of the quantum Zeno effect across different physical systems confirms that the power of an observation to alter a reality is a fundamental feature of a quantum mechanics. It is not just a theoretical curiosity. It suggests that a consciousness and a physical reality are interconnected in ways that a science is only beginning to explore. This brings us to perhaps the most mind-bending quantum paradox of all. The delayed choice quantum eraser experiment appears to demonstrate that a present-day decision can influence an event that occurred in the past. The setup involves quantum particles that travel through a double-slit apparatus. This creates an interference pattern that proves they behaved like waves. But here's where it gets impossible. Scientists can choose whether to measure which path each particle took. They can choose this after the particles have already passed through the slits and been detected. If they decide to measure the path information, the interference pattern disappears. This suggests the particles behaved like particles rather than waves. If they decide not to measure the path information, the interference pattern remains. This confirms a wave-like behavior. The particles seem to know what measurements will be performed on them in the future. They seem to adjust their past behavior accordingly. This suggests that the fundamental principle of causality might not hold at the quantum level. The principle states that a cause must precede an effect. The future appears to be influencing the past in ways that completely undermine our understanding of a temporal order and a logical reasoning. Scientists have performed increasingly sophisticated versions of this experiment. They have confirmed that the effect is real and measurable. They have created situations where the choice of whether to erase a path information is made by a random number generator. This is done after the particles have already been detected. This eliminates any possibility that the particle could somehow know in advance what a measurement would be performed. The result, a consistently A, shows a violation of a classical, a causality, a present day, a choice, and appears to, a retroactively, a determine the A, past, a behavior of a quantum, a particle. This creates a form of a backward in time, an influence that challenges and everything we think we know, everything about the nature of a time and a causation. These experiments force us to confront a possibility that a common sense, a notion of a cause and an effect is fundamentally flawed. It is flawed when applied to a quantum, a mechanical, a system. A time itself, a might, not a flow in the linear, a predictable, a manner we, an experience in an everyday life. The past, a present, and a future. Might be an interconnected in a way that makes a temporal, a paradox, not just a possible, but an inevitable. The accumulative, an effect of these, a quantum, a paradox, is creating an existential crisis in a physics. The measurement, a problem, an information, a paradox, a false, a vacuum, a decay, the quantum, a Zeno, an effect, and a retrocausal, a quantum, erasure, is all pointing towards the same, a terrifying conclusion. A reality is nothing like what we thought it was. The scientist at the University of Vienna has pushed this terror to its logical and extreme. They've proven that the contradiction in a quantum, a mechanics, isn't just a theoretical problem. A problem that might be solved with a mathematics, or a sophisticated experiment. They're a fundamental, a feature of a reality that cannot be eliminated. It cannot be eliminated without abandoning a basic, a principle that makes a science possible. Their work demonstrates that no interpretation of a quantum, a mechanics, can preserve all the assumption we consider an essential for a rational, a thought, and either an objective, a fact doesn't, and exist, or an observer doesn't have a free will to choose there an experiment, or an information can travel an instantaneously across any a distance in the A universe. Pick your A poison, because one of these a cherished A belief, A must be A sacrificed. But the A horror doesn't stop with a philosophical an implication. These a quantum a paradox is a beginning to a manifest in the A real a world. They do so through an advancing a technology, as we build more a sophisticated a quantum, a computer, and a measurement, a device. We're creating a system that operates A, according to these, A, terrifying, a quantum, a rule, not the A, comfortable, A, classical, A, physics of R, an everyday, an experience. A quantum, a computer, doesn't just process an information differently than a classical a computer. It processes an information that exists in a multiple, a contradictory, a state simultaneously. It performs a calculation on a possibility rather than an actuality. It manipulates a quantum, a superposition that shouldn't and exist. A, according to an intuitive, an understanding of a logic and a mathematics. When a quantum, a computer runs an algorithm, it's not following a sequence of a logical step. It's an exploring a multiple, a computational pathway simultaneously. It is an existing in a superposition of a having, a found, and not a found, the an answer. This happens until the A final A measurement. A collapses the A system into a definite A result. The A computer, literally A doesn't know what a calculation it has performed until someone observes the an outcome. This creates a nightmarish a scenario for a technological future. We're building a machine whose fundamental an operation depends on a quantum, a mechanical principle that we don't understand, and that appears to violate a basic logic. These computers can solve a certain problem, and exponentially faster than any classical computer. But they do so by exploiting a quantum, an effect that A seems to allow them to cheat the A normal, a rule of a computation, the an implication. A extends afar, A beyond a computer, a science. A quantum, a technology is beginning to permeate every an aspect of a modern life, from a medical, imaging, a device to a GPS, a satellite to a secure, a communication, a network. Each of these a technology and operates by manipulating a quantum, an effect that contradicts our basic, an understanding of how the physical world should behave. We're becoming an increasingly dependent on a technology that works through a mechanism we cannot explain, a mechanism using a coherent, a physical, a principle. Our most advanced tool is based on a quantum, a mechanics. But a quantum, a mechanics itself, contains a logical, a contradiction that threatens the foundation of a scientific, a reasoning. This a technological, a dependence on an incomprehensible, a quantum, an effect, creates a new, a form of an existential, a vulnerability. We're building a civilization that operates, according to a physical, a principle that appears to be a fundamentally irrational. Our most important a technology works, but we don't know why they work, nor do we know whether they will continue working as we push deeper into the quantum realm. An economic implication is staggering. Some, an economist, predicts that the A, widespread an adoption of a quantum, a technology, could trigger what they call a quantum, a productivity, a paradox. Just as an introduction of a computer, and initially a decreased of productivity before, and eventually a revolutionizing an economy, a quantum, a technology, a might, a cause, a massive, an economic, a disruption. This could happen before their A benefit. A becomes an apparent. But a quantum, a productivity, a paradox could be a far more severe than a previous, a technological, a transition, a digital, a computer for all there, a complexity, a still, an operates according to a logical, a principle that a human can understand. A quantum, a computer, and operates according to a principle that appears to contradict a logic itself. This, a disconnect between a human, an understanding, and a technological, a capability creates an unprecedented risk. We're developing a tool that we cannot fully control or predict. This is because they operate according to a quantum mechanical, a rule that we don't comprehend. The more powerful, these technology. Becomes the more we depend on a physical process. A process that seems to defy a rational explanation. The terror deepens when we consider that a consciousness itself might be a quantum, a mechanical, a phenomenon. Some scientist proposes that the stranger property of a quantum, a mechanics, suggests that a consciousness plays a fundamental role. This is particularly the role of an observation in determining an outcome. It suggests a consciousness plays a fundamental role in the structure of a reality. If a consciousness is a quantum, a mechanical, then the paradox and a contradiction that plague an understanding of a quantum, a physics, also apply. They apply to the nature of a mind itself. The measurement, a problem, becomes a consciousness, a problem. The observer, a dependence of a quantum, a reality, becomes a statement about the fundamental, nature of a subjective, an experience. This possibility suggests that the crisis in a physics is also a crisis in an understanding of ourselves. If a quantum, a mechanics, and accurately describes a consciousness, then our sense of a being, a unified, a consistent, an observer, might be an illusion. We might exist in a quantum, a superposition of a different, a mental, a state. This would last until an act of an introspection forces our mind to collapse into a definite, a thought and an experience. The implication is psychologically devastating. If a consciousness is a quantum, a mechanical, then the continuity of a personal, an identity that we take for granted might be fundamentally an illusory. Each moment of a conscious an experience might involve a quantum, a collapse that determines not just what we observe but who we are as an observer. A recent research in quantum biology has discovered a quantum, an effect, an operating in a living system. From a photosynthesis in a plant to a navigation in a bird to a possibly even a neural, a process in the human, a brain. These discoveries suggest that a life itself might be a quantum, a mechanical, a phenomenon that operates according to the same, a paradoxical, a rule that governs a particle, a physics. If a biological process is a quantum, a mechanical, then the strange, a property of a superposition, an entanglement, and a measurement induced a collapse, might be an operating continuously within our own, a body, every, a biological, a decision from the firing of a neuron to the A, folding of a protein, A, might, and involve a quantum, A, process. A process that exists in a multiple A state simultaneously until it collapses into a definite an outcome. This, a quantum, a biology, creates a terrifying picture of a life as a collection of a quantum, a system that exists in a constant, a superposition, a system, a making, a probabilistic, a transition between a different, a possible, a state. We, might not be, the coherent, a unified, a being we imagine ourselves to be. We may be rather a quantum, a phenomenon that temporarily coalesces into an appearance of a stable, a biological, an entity. The A, discovery of a quantum, an effect in a biological A, system also A, raises a disturbing question about a free A will and a determinism. If our A, brain A, operates A according to a quantum, a mechanical, a principle, then our A, thought, and a decision, A, might be a fundamentally A, random, not a determined by a logical A, reasoning, or a conscious, a choice. A quantum, a mechanics, and includes a genuine, a randomness that cannot be predicted or controlled even in a principle. If a consciousness, A, depends on a quantum, a process, then a mental, a life, a might be, governed by this, a fundamental, a randomness, not by the A, rational, A, decision-making, a process, we, an experience, A, subjectively. This, a quantum, a randomness in a consciousness, couldn't explain why a human, a behavior, an often, an appears, an irrational, or an unpredictable. We, might be, a quantum, a system that occasionally collapses into a coherent thought and a decision. But we may spend most of our time existing in a superposition of a different, a possible, a mental, a state. The A, philosophical, an implication, and attacks the very A foundation of a human, an identity, and a moral, a responsibility. If an action is determined by a quantum, a randomness, rather than a conscious, a choice, what does that mean for a concept like a guilt? What does it mean for a praise, a punishment, and a personal, a growth? Are we responsible for a decision that A might be, a fundamentally a random, a quantum, an event? These questions become even more disturbing when we consider that a quantum, mechanics, might apply not just to an individual, a consciousness. It might apply to a collective, a human, a behavior, and a social, a system. If a group of people can become a quantum, and entangled through an interaction, then a social, a phenomenon, a might, and exhibit the same, a paradoxical, a property that governs a quantum, a particle. A quantum, a social, a system could exist in a superposition of a different, a collective, a state. This could last until a measurement or an observation forces them to collapse into a definite, a social, a reality. An election, a market, a cultural, a movement, and a historical, an event, might be a quantum, a mechanical, a process that operates according to a probability, a distribution, not a deterministic, a cause, and an effect, a relationship. This a quantum, a view of a society, suggests that a social, a reality itself, might be an observer-dependent, and a fundamentally an uncertain, a different, an observer, a might, a legitimately a disagree about a social, a fact. They could disagree in the same, a way that a quantum, a physicist can, disagree about an outcome of a quantum, a measurement. An implication extends to our an understanding of a history, a culture, and a human, a progress. If a social, a system is a quantum, a mechanical, then a past, a might, and exist in a superposition. It could exist in superposition until a historical, an observation, collapses it into a definite, a narrative. The future, might be a fundamentally, an undetermined. It may be an existing as a probability, a distribution over a possible, an outcome, not a following, a predictable, a trajectory. These, a quantum, a social, an effect, couldn't explain why a human, a society, and often behaves in an apparently an irrational way that contradicts an economic, a model, and a political, a theory. We might be trying to understand a quantum, a phenomenon, using a classical, a reasoning. This could lead to a systematic, a failure in a prediction and a control. The cumulative, an effect of these, a discovery, is creating a comprehensive, a crisis in a human, an understanding. A quantum of mechanics isn't just a changing of physics, it's a potentially a revolutionizing our understanding of a consciousness, a biology, a technology, a society, and a reality itself. We're discovering that the quantum, a weirdness that a physicist observes in there, a laboratory might be an operating at every level of an existence, from a subatomic, a particle to a human, a consciousness to a social, a system to the structure of the universe itself. A comfortable, a predictable, a reality of a classical, a physics, might be nothing more than an approximation that breaks down when we look closely at any phenomenon. This, a quantum, a revolution, is happening, whether we're ready for it or not. Our technology is becoming an increasingly a quantum, a mechanical. An understanding of a biology is revealing a quantum, an effect in a living, a system. And an exploration of a consciousness is an uncovering, a quantum, an aspect of a mental, an experience. But we're approaching these a quantum, a phenomenon with a mind that evolved to understand a classical, a reality. We're trying to comprehend a quantum, a superposition, an entanglement, and a measurement-induced collapse. We do this using a cognitive, a tool that developed to track an object, and to predict a trajectory and understand a cause and an effect, a relationship in a classical world. This a mismatch between a quantum, a reality, and a classical, an intuition, creates a fundamental, an epistemological, a crisis. We might be living in a universe that's an alien to a human, a cognition. So alien that we simply cannot understand it. Using the mental category and a logical structure that feels natural to us. The terror isn't just that a quantum of mechanics is strange. The terror is that a quantum of mechanics might be inaccurate, a description of a reality, and a reality might be fundamentally incomprehensible to a human mind. We might be a conscious, a quantum, a system trying to understand ourselves, using a classical, a concept that is fundamentally inadequate for the task. This a possibility suggests that the current crisis in physics is just the beginning. As we continue to explore a quantum, a phenomenon at a larger scale and in a more complex system, we're likely to encounter a paradox and a contradiction that is even more disturbing than anything we've discovered so far. The quantum, a rabbit, a hole, and appears to go all the way down. It is leading to an implication that challenges not just our scientific, a theory. It challenges our most basic, an assumption about the nature of an existence, a consciousness, and a knowledge itself. We're standing at the edge of a conceptual, an abyss that might be a too deep for a human, an understanding to a fathom, and yet we cannot turn back. A survival as a technological, a civilization, depends on mastering a quantum, technology, a technology that operates according to a principle we don't understand. We're locked into a trajectory that will force us to confront a quantum, a reality. We must confront it whether we're psychologically prepared for it or not. The next phase of a human, a development, a might, require us to abandon a classical worldview that has guided a human thinking for a millennia. And we may need to learn to think in a genuinely quantum term. But making that a transition could fundamentally alter what it means to be a human. We might need to become a quantum, a being to survive in a quantum, a universe. But the process of a quantum, an evolution, a might, an erase, and everything that we currently consider essentially a human, it may replace a classical, a consciousness with something, a quantum, a mechanical, something that we cannot imagine or comprehend. This is the ultimate, a quantum, a paradox, an understanding, a quantum, a reality, a might, require, sacrificing our, humanity, but a remaining, a human, might, condemn us to a permanent, an ignorance about the true, a nature of the universe we inhabit. The choice, if it is a choice at all, might already be determined by a quantum, a mechanical, a process that operates beyond the reach of a classical, a reasoning, and a conscious, a decision-making. We might be a quantum, a system, an evolving according to a probability, a distribution that we cannot control or predict. The quantum, a revolution, is in transforming everything, whether we embrace it or resist it. The only a question is whether will maintain any recognizable human an identity, as we're swept along by a quantum, a force that operates according to a rule that transcends a classical, an understanding. But this, a transformation, is an accelerating. The quantum, an effect, is becoming more apparent and more unavoidable with each passing year. The time for a comfortable, a classical, an assumption is an ending. The age of a quantum, a reality, has already begun. The implication, becomes an even more, a terrifying when we examine what a physicist calls the Copenhagen, an interpretation. This remains the most popular way of an understanding, quantum, mechanics. It is accepted by nearly a half of all, an experimental, physicist, but a popularity doesn't make it any less disturbing. According to a Copenhagen, a quantum, a system, doesn't have a definite property until it's measured. The wave, a function that describes a particle's a quantum, a state, represents a pure, a possibility. It is a mathematical, a ghost that haunts the space between an existence and a non-existence. Only when we observe the system does a reality crystallize into something, a definite and a measurable. Think about what this means for the world. Around you. Every an atom in your body, every a photon of a light hitting your eye, every an electron flowing through your device, and exists in a quantum, a superposition. It exists in superposition until the moment of an observation forces it to choose a definite, a state. The A solid, A matter, your A sitting on the A, air, your A breathing, the A screen, your A reading this from. All of it is a constantly a flickering. It is flickering between an existing and not an existing at the A quantum level. But here's where the A terror deepens. The A Copenhagen, an interpretation, A Kant an, explain what constitutes a measurement. Wherean exactly does the A quantum, a world an end, and the A classical, a world A, begin? When does a superposition, a collapse into a definite reality? Is it when the A photon A hits your A retina, when the A signal A reaches your A brain? When you have become consciously and aware of seeing something, the boundary between a quantum and a classical, a reality is completely and arbitrary. We draw the A line, A wherever it's convenient for our A calculation. But there's no A physical, A principle that A determines where A quantum A weirdness A stops, nor where a normal A reality A begins. This means that the A comfortable, a classical, a world of our, an everyday, an experience, a might be, and nothing more than a useful fiction, an interpretation, pushes this logic to its an ultimate, a conclusion. If a quantum, a mechanics, an applies to an everything, then you as an observer, A, must also be a quantum, a system. Your A brain, your A consciousness, your A various sense of a self, and exists in a superposition. It exists until the A moment you observe yourself thinking, but who or what is doing the observing. This A creates an infinite regress of an observer and observing an observer. To measure your A, own, a quantum, a state, you, a need, a higher level, an observer. But that an observer also needs to be observed by yet another an observer. The hierarchy of a consciousness A required to collapse, a quantum, a superposition, an extends infinitely and upward. It has no an ultimate, a ground for a reality to rest A upon. A recent experiment has made this a philosophical, a nightmare, a concrete. A scientist has created a situation where a human, an observer, genuinely disagrees about an outcome of a quantum, a measurement. They disagree not because of an experimental, an error, or a miscommunication. They disagree but because a reality itself appears to be an observer dependent. In these, an experiment 1, a scientist, A makes a measurement, A inside, A sealed a laboratory. Another, a scientist, an outside, treats an entire lab as a quantum, a system. From the an inside perspective, the A measurement has a definite an outcome. From the an outside perspective, the A lab, A remains in a superposition. The A scientist, A inside, A existing in a quantum, A mixture of A having an observed A, different A, result. A, both A perspective is A, mathematically A, valid A, according to a quantum, A, mechanics. A both an observer is a following the a same, a physical, a law, and A, using the a same, a scientific, a method. But they reach a contradictory, a conclusion about what actually A happened. This isn't a failure of an experimental design. It's a feature of a quantum, a reality itself. An implication A extends afar, A beyond, a laboratory, a condition. If a consciousness A plays a fundamental role in a quantum, a mechanics, then every a conscious A being is constantly A making A quantum, a measurement. They do so simply by being aware. You're a thought, a perception, and an experience. is a continuously a collapsing, a quantum, a superposition throughout your environment. But a different, a conscious, an observer, a might, a collapse, a same, a quantum, a system, in a different, a way. This would create a multiple, an incompatible, a version of a reality that somehow coexist without a logical contradiction. The A universe, you, an experience A, through your A, consciousness A, might be a fundamentally a different from the A universe, and experienced by someone A, standing A, right, A, next to you. This an observer, a dependence of a reality, creates what a physicist calls a problem of an intersubjective, an agreement. If a reality is a different for each, an observer, how do we ever agree on anything? How is a communication possible between a being who might be living in a genuinely a different version of the A universe? An answer, A, seems to be that an agreement is only an approximate and a temporary. The A classical, a world of A shared an objective, a fact, and emerges as a kind of an average, or it emerges as a consensus, a reality that glosses over a deeper, a quantum, a disagreement between a different, an observer. But this, a consensus, is a fragile and breaks down when we probe a quantum, a system, a two, a precisely. We're discovering that the asocial, a construction of a reality isn't just a philosophical, a metaphor. At the a quantum, a level, a reality, literally is a constructed. It is constructed through the ain, interaction between a conscious, an observer, an objective, a physical, a universe that a science claims to study. A might be nothing more than a collective, a hallucination, shared by a quantum, a being who can never fully access, and each and others a subjective, an experience. This a quantum, a subjectivity, A becomes an even more a disturbing when we consider its implication for a memory and a personal, an identity. If your A brain is a quantum, a system, then your A memory exists in a superposition. It exists in superposition until the A moment you recall them. The act of remembering doesn't just retrieve an information about the past. It literally creates the past by collapsing a quantum, a superposition of a possible history. Every time you remember something, you're potentially selecting one, a version of your personal history, a version from a quantum, a superposition of a different, a possible, a past, your an identity, your a sense of a continuity through a time, your an understanding of who you are and how you gotta hear. All of it, might be continuously reconstructed. It is reconstructed through a quantum, a measurement, performed by your own, a consciousness. A research suggests that this isn't just a speculation. A scientist studying the quantum, a property of a microtubule in a brain, a neuron, has found an evidence that a quantum, an effect, a might, play a crucial role in a consciousness and a memory, a formation. If these findings are confirmed, then our mind operates according to the same paradoxical quantum, a rule that governs a particle, a physics. This would mean that a stream of a consciousness, an experience as a unified, a continuous, a flow of a thought and a perception, is actually a series of a discrete, a quantum, a collapse. Each a moment of an awareness and involves a quantum, a measurement that selects one, a possibility from a vast, a superposition of a potential, a mental, a state. an implication for a freer will is a catastrophic. If our decision emerges from a quantum, a process, then they might be fundamentally a random, not a determined by a rational deliberation, a quantum, a mechanics, and includes a genuine and irreducible a randomness that cannot be predicted and even in a principle. If a consciousness depends on a quantum, a randomness, then a choice might be no more determined than the decay of a radioactive atom. But the terra goes deeper than a randomness. A quantum mechanics also includes a non-local, a correlation that transcends a space and a time. If a consciousness is a quantum, a mechanical, then your thought and a decision might be instantaneously correlated with an event, a happening, and anywhere in the universe. This would create a web of a quantum, an entanglement that connects all, a conscious, a being. This, a quantum, an interconnectedness, could explain a phenomenon that a classical, a physics, a cannot, an account for, a telepathy, a precognition, and a collective, an unconscious, and a morphic, a resonance, and an other, a paranormal, a claim. These might be a manifestation of a quantum, a correlation between a different, a conscious, an observer. But this, a connection, comes at a price. If a consciousness is a quantum and entangled across a space and a time, then an individual, an identity, becomes a meaningless. Your thought and an experience, might be fundamentally inseparable from the mental state of every and other conscious being. Every other conscious being in the universe. The boundary between a self and another dissolves at the quantum level. The philosophical an implication and attacks the very foundation of a human, an experience. If a quantum, a mechanics, and accurately describes a consciousness, then an everything we consider essentially a human might be a classical, an illusion. This includes an individual, an identity to a rational, a thought to a moral, a responsibility. It is an illusion that emerges from a deeper, a quantum, a process we cannot understand or control. This, a quantum, a view of a consciousness, also raises a terrifying question about a death and a survival. If a consciousness is a quantum, a phenomenon, what happens when the physical, a brain, stops functioning? Do the quantum, a correlation that constitutes a mind, persist after a biological death? Could a consciousness exist in some a quantum, a form that transcends an individual, a brain? Some an interpretation of a quantum, a mechanics, suggests that an information cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. If a consciousness is fundamentally an informational, then a death might not be the end of a mental existence. It may be a transition to a different, a form of a quantum, an information, a processing. But this a quantum, an afterlife, would be nothing like a traditional, a religious, a concept of a survival. It would be a realm of a pure quantum, an information and existing in a superposition across a multiple, a possible, a state, simultaneously. An individual, an identity would be meaningless in such a realm. This is as a quantum, an information can be copied, merged, split, and transformed in a way that a classical, a mind, cannot comprehend. The possibility of a quantum, a consciousness, also creates a form of an existential, a terror. If your mind is a quantum, a system, then it might be possible for an external, an observer, to manipulate your mental state. They could do this by making a measurement on a quantum, a system, and entangled with your A brain. Your A thought, a memory, and a decision could be altered without your A knowledge. Altered through a quantum, an interference, an effect, an advanced, a quantum, a technology, a might, and eventually, and allow for a direct, a manipulation of a consciousness itself, a quantum, a computer, could potentially assimilate a human, a mind. It could create an artificial, a consciousness, or a transfer, a mental, a pattern between a different, a physical, a substrate. The boundary between a natural and an artificial, a consciousness, would dissolve. This would happen as a quantum, an information, a processing A becomes more sophisticated. These technology could enable a form of a mental, an existence that is impossible for a biological brain. A quantum, a mind, could exist in a superposition. It could experience a multiple, a stream of a consciousness simultaneously. They could, A, become entangled with another, a mind, a sharing, a thought, and an experience. Directly, they could manipulate their A, own, a quantum, a state, to alter their A, memory, a personality, and a decision-making, a process. But these, a quantum, an enhancement of a consciousness, a might, a come, at the cost of an everything, we consider an essentially a human, a quantum, a mind, a might, be more powerful than a biological, a brain. But it would operate, according to a principle that is fundamentally alien to a human, a psychology. The A transition from a biological to a quantum, a consciousness, A might be an irreversible. It, A, might be an impossible to a return to a once a mind, A becomes a quantum, a mechanical. To return to a limited but a comprehensible an experience of a classical an awareness. An enhancement, A, might be a permanent. It would be a transforming a human, a consciousness, into something that can no longer relate to its biological an origin. This creates what a researcher calls a quantum, a consciousness, a paradox, an understanding, a quantum, a reality, a might require a becoming, a quantum, a being. But the A process of a quantum, a transformation, a might, a destroy, and everything that A makes us a human, we might gain an access to an ultimate, a truth about the nature of a reality, but we may lose our humanity in the A process. The A paradox and extends to our an entire A civilization, an advanced, a quantum, a technology, a might, a solve every material, a problem, it could, an eliminate, a scarcity, a cure, a disease, a reverse, an aging, and a provide an unlimited, a clean, an energy. But in achieving these a benefit, a might, A, require, A, transforming a human, A, society into something, a quantum, a mechanical, something that operates A, according to a principle that transcends a classical, an understanding. We, A, might be an approaching a phase, a transition in a human, an evolution, a transition where a classical, a consciousness, A, gives way to a quantum, an awareness. But this a transition, A, might be an irreversible, and we have no way of knowing, A, whether a quantum, a being would consider there an existence, an improvement over a tragic, a human, a consciousness, or a loss of an everything that A made a life, a meaningful. The A quantum, a future, is an approaching A, whether we choose it or not. Our A technology is a becoming an increasingly A quantum, a mechanical. An understanding of a biology is a revealing a quantum, an effect in a living a system, and an exploration of a consciousness is an uncovering a quantum, an aspect of a mental an experience. We're a being a swept along by a quantum, a force that operates a according to a rule we A don't and understand and a cannot a control. The A classical, a world of a predictable, a cause and an effect, is a giving away to a quantum, a reality of a superposition, an entanglement and an observer dependent, an outcome. The A scientist who A studies these, a phenomenon, is a terrified not just by their strangeness, but by their an implication for the A future of a human, a consciousness and a civilization. We're discovering that a reality is a nothing like what we have thought it was. And the A process of a discovering the A truth, A might A transform us into something we A cannot and imagine. The A, quantum A, revolution is an already and underway. And there a might be no, a path, a back to thee, a comfortable, a certainty of a classical, a reality. We're a quantum, a being, a living in a quantum, a universe, and the a time has a come to a confront the a full, an implication of that, a fact, even if it a means a sacrificing and everything we a once considered an essentially a human. The a quantum, a revolution, is a consuming an everything. It consumes everything from the A smallest a particle to the A largest a structure in the A universe, to a consciousness itself. We're discovering that the A classical, a world we a thought we an inhabited, was a never a real. It was just a temporary an approximation that's now a giving away to something, a quantum, a mechanical, something that transcends a human, an understanding. The A scientist, A studying these A phenomenon, is a no longer A just an observing, a quantum an effect. They are becoming a quantum an effect themselves. They are a transformed by their, an investigation into something that can comprehend a quantum, a reality, but it can a know, a longer, a relate to a classical, a human, an experience. This is the a quantum, a paradox that terrifies a scientist, A most of all. The a truth about a reality, A might be inaccessible only to a being who is a no, a longer a human in any a recognizable sense. And understanding the A universe, A might require A, sacrificing our A humanity itself, and that a transformation, A might be the a price, we a must, a pay for a knowledge about the a quantum, a nature of an existence, we a might, a gain an access to an ultimate, a truth about a reality. But we may lose ourselves completely in the A process. The A quantum a future is a coming, and we might discover that a consciousness itself is just another a quantum, a phenomenon, a subject to the same, a paradox, and an impossibility that governs an everything A. Else, in this a stranger universe, we're desperately trying to understand. But an understanding might transform us into something, a quantum, a mechanical, something so an alien to a human, an experience, so much so that the classical A being we once were would no longer recognize what we've become. That A might be the A, most A, terrifying A quantum, an effect of all, the A quantum, A nightmare, an extends an even further when we examine what a physicist A calls a vacuum, a decay, a process, a fundamentally a destructive, that it could obliterate not just a universe, it could obliterate a concept of an existence itself. This isn't some distant, a theoretical, a concern. A scientist hasn't actually simulated this, a cosmic, an apocalypse in a laboratory, using a quantum, a computer. They are watching in a fascination and a horror as they create a microscopic, a version of the bubble that could destroy everything. Here's what makes a vacuum, a decay, a terrifying. An entire, a universe, a might be, a balanced on a knife's an edge. It may be trapped in what a physicist calls a false vacuum, a state. Think of it like a ball, sitting in a shallow, a dip on a hillside. It looks stable, it feels permanent, but it's actually in a precarious position. At any moment without a warning, a quantum mechanics couldn't allow that ball to tunnel through the hill and to roll down to the true bottom. When that happens in our universe, the consequence is an absolute, a bubble of an altered space-time, begins and expanding at the speed of light. It is rewriting the fundamental, a law of physics, as it grows. Inside this bubble, the force that holds an atom together changes. The particle that makes up a matter transforms into a new form. The constant that governs chemistry and biology, becomes a different, a value. And everything we know and everything we are and everything that has and ever and existed would be instantly annihilated, and it would be replaced by a universe with a completely different physical law. The most horrifying aspect is that this process is an entirely random and an unpredictable. A quantum mechanics and includes a genuine randomness that cannot be controlled or predicted, and even in a principle. The vacuum, a decay, an event that destroys our universe could happen right now. It could happen while you're reading these word. It could have started 1 billion years ago in a distant galaxy. The destruction, a wave, racing toward us at a light, a speed, an invisible and an unstoppable. There would be no warning, no way to prepare, no possibility of an escape. The bubble of a cosmic, a destruction, travels at the ultimate speed, a limit of the universe. By the time we could possibly detect it and approaching, we would be annihilated. We would be annihilated in that same an instant. Our final moment would be a moment we discovered our doom was upon us. A recent experiment has made this a theoretical, a horror, a tangible and a real. Using a quantum, a computer, called an annealer, a scientist has successfully created and studied the formation of these cosmic bubble. They have done so under a controlled laboratory, a condition. They watch as a quantum field transitions from a false vacuum state to a true vacuum state. This forms an expanding region where the law of physics is fundamentally different. The researcher describes chilling an experience watching these simulation. They're not just studying an abstract mathematics anymore. They're observing an actual, a physical, a process that mirrors exactly what could happen. What could happen to our universe at any moment. Each simulation is a miniature, a version of a cosmic, an annihilation, a practice, a run for the end of an everything. These are quantum, a simulation, reveals a disturbing detail about how a vacuum, a decay would unfold. The transition isn't a gradual or a merciful, it's an instantaneous and a total. A moment, the older physics, applies. The next, a moment. A reality, operates. According to completely different rule. There's no intermediate, a state. No a transition, a period. No a gradual, a change. There is just a sudden and absolute transformation. But the terror deepens when we consider an implication of a quantum, a superposition for a vacuum, a decay. Before an observation or a measurement, a quantum, a system, and exists in all a possible state simultaneously. This means our universe might and already be in a superposition of a having an undergone a vacuum, a decay, and not an having an undergone a vacuum, a decay. A reality itself a might and exist in a quantum, a limbo between an existence and an annihilation. This may last until a cosmic, a measurement, forces it to a collapse, into one, a state, or the an other. The an act of studying a vacuum, a decay, might A itself be a contributing to the A probability. A probability that a vacuum, a decay will occur. The act of running these a quantum, a simulation of making a measurement on a quantum, a field, a state, might be a contributing, a quantum, an experiment that probes the A stability of a vacuum, a state, might be a nudging the A universe closer to the A critical, a point where a spontaneous, a tunneling a becomes an inevitable. A scientist finds themselves in an impossible position. They need to study a vacuum, a decay to understand a cosmic, a stability, and the long-term fate of the darker universe. But there, an investigation, A, might be an increasing the A, risk of a triggering, the A, very A, catastrophe, their A, trying to understand. Each a measurement, each a simulation, each a theoretical, a calculation, might be bringing us closer to a cosmic, an annihilation. This creates what a researcher calls an observation, a paradox of a vacuum, a decay. The A, more we, learn about the A, stability of our A universe. The A, lesser stable we A, might be A, making it. A knowledge itself, A becomes a cosmic, a risk, a factor, a potential, a trigger for a universal, a destruction. The scientist studying these phenomenon is acutely and aware that their A research, A might, and inadvertently A cause the an end of an everything. The quantum nature of a vacuum, a decay, also raises a disturbing question about the nature of an existence itself. If our A universe can spontaneously transition to a state with a different, a physical, a law, what does that say about the permanence of a reality? Are the fundamental, a constant that governs a chemistry and a physics just temporary? An accident that could change at a moment. This quantum, an instability of a physical, a law, suggests that in everything we consider a permanent and a reliable about the universe is actually a contingent and a fragile. The A speed of a light, the A strength of a gravity, the A mass of an electron, all the A constant, that A makes our A form of a matter and an energy. A possible A might be A, nothing more than a temporary A, value. A value in a cosmic, a lottery, that could be redrawn at an instant. A recent, a theoretical, a work, suggests that a vacuum, a decay, might not be a single, an event. It might be a continuous, a process, and occurring throughout the A universe. A multiple, a bubble, a nucleation, an event, might be happening constantly. This would create a cosmic, a foam of a region with a different, a physical, a law. Our unobservable, a universe, might be a just one, a bubble among a countless another. Each an operating A, according to its A, own, a unique, a set of a physical, a constant. This a multiverse of a vacuum, a decay, a bubble, creates a nightmarish, a picture of an existence as an endless, a series of a temporary, a reality that spontaneously appears and disappears through a quantum, a mechanical, a process, a civilization, a galaxy, an entire, a cosmic, a history, a might be, a constantly, an emerging, and a being, and erased. This could happen as a quantum, a field, a transitions between a different, a vacuum, a state. We might be a living in a universe that's a simultaneously a beginning and an ending at every a moment, with a countless version of a reality, a blinking in and out of an existence. This could be happening through a vacuum, a decay, a process, and occurring at a scale we cannot detect. The stable, a permanent, a cosmos we perceive might be an illusion created by our limited, a perspective on a quantum, a process, and operating across a vast region of a space and a time, the possibility that a universe has undergone a vacuum, a decay, a multiple, a time, raises an even more disturbing question. A previous, a version of a reality with a different, a physical, a law, and a different, a form of a matter and a consciousness. Might have existed. They might have existed before our current, a cosmic, a phase, began. These an earlier universe would have been completely erased. They would have left no trace of their existence in our current reality. This suggests that a consciousness and an intelligence might be a temporary, a phenomenon that emerge briefly between a vacuum, a decay, an event, and a phenomenon that is obliterated when the next phase of transition occurs, and everything we consider meaningful about an existence, from a love and an art to a science and a philosophy, might be just a fleeting pattern that emerge accidentally in the brief, an interval between a cosmic, a reset, but the quantum, a nature of a consciousness, and adds another, a layer of a horror to the vacuum, a decay, a scenario. If a consciousness is a quantum, a mechanical, a phenomenon, then it might survive a vacuum, a decay. It could do so by transitioning into a quantum, a state that exists and independently of the physical, a law that governs a matter and an energy. But this quantum, a consciousness, would exist in a realm, an alien to our current, an experience, so alien that a survival would be indistinguishable from an annihilation. The scientist, studying a vacuum, a decay, describes a growing sense that they're investigating not just a physical process, they are investigating the fundamental, a nature of an existence itself. They're discovering that a reality might be far more fragile and temporary than anyone imagined. A reality subject to a quantum, a process that could erase everything. It could do so without a warning or an explanation. These researchers work with a constant, an awareness that their universe, might be living on a borrowed time. Every day they continue their an investigation is another day. Another day, the cosmic lottery hasn't come up with the combination that triggers a vacuum, a decay. They're racing against a quantum, a probability to understand the nature of a reality. They race before a reality itself disappears. The psychological, an impact of studying a vacuum, a decay is profound. How do you maintain a motivation to pursue a knowledge when that knowledge reveals that everything might end at any moment, end through a process you cannot control or predict? How do you find a meaning in an existence when an existence itself appears to be a temporary, an accident that could be corrected by a quantum, a mechanics at any instant? Some, a physicist, reports experiencing an existential vertigo when working with a vacuum, a decay, a calculation. The mathematics is clear, the physics is sound, but the implication is an overwhelming that a human psychology struggles to process them. They are confronting the possibility that a nothing they do a matter. This is because an everything, a might be, an erased by a quantum, a process, and operating on a cosmic scale. But this, a confrontation with a cosmic, a meaninglessness, has also produced an unexpected, an insight into a nature of a consciousness and a value. If an everything is a temporary and a fragile, if a reality itself and exists only in the gap between a quantum, a catastrophe, then perhaps the meaning we create is more precious. The meaning we create during these a brief an interval is more precious precisely because it's so an ephemeral. The quantum, a consciousness that emerges in a space between a vacuum, a decay, an event, a might be a universe's a method for creating a meaning and a purpose in an otherwise a random and a destructive a cosmos, an intelligence and an awareness, a might be how a universe and observes itself. It observes itself during a temporary, a phase when an observation is a possible. This suggests that a consciousness, a might, a play, a fundamental, a role, not just in a quantum, a mechanics, but in a cosmic, an evolution itself. An act of an observation that collapses a quantum, a superposition, might also be the process that creates a temporary, an island of a stability, an island in an ocean of a quantum, a chaos, a conscious, a being, a might be, the universes, a way of maintaining a pocket of a coherent reality, a pocket in the face of a constant, a quantum, a dissolution. But this, a cosmic, a role, comes with a terrible, a responsibility. If a consciousness is what maintains the stability of a local, a reality through an observation, then the disappearance of a consciousness, a might, a trigger, the very a vacuum, a decay, an event that a conscious a being is trying to prevent. The universe, a might, depend on the continued, an existence of an observer. It may depend on them to maintain its, a current, a physical, a law. This creates a feedback, a loop between a consciousness and a cosmic, a stability, a loop that's both an empowering and a terrifying. A conscious being, might have the power to prevent a vacuum, a decay. They can do this through the act of an observation, but they also bear the responsibility for maintaining a reality itself. The survival of the universe, might, literally, depend on the survival of a consciousness. A recent, an experiment in a quantum, a consciousness, a research has detected a correlation between the mental, a state of an observer, and the stability of a quantum, a field, a configuration in their vicinity. A scientist with a different, an emotional, a state, a different, a level of an attention, a degree of a scientific, an understanding, and appears to an influence the quantum, a system. A quantum system they're observing in a way that affects a vacuum, a stability. These a consciousness field, an interaction, suggests that an act of studying a vacuum, a decay, might be more than just a passive, an observation, a conscious, an observer, might be, and actively participating in the quantum, a process that determines whether a vacuum, a decay, occurs or not. The scientist, an investigating cosmic, stability, might be a cosmic, stabilizer themselves, their consciousness, serving as a buffer, against a quantum, a catastrophe. But this power comes with a price. If a consciousness and affects a vacuum, a stability, then the A, psychological, a state of a conscious A being A, becomes a factor in a cosmic A, survival, a depression, an anxiety, a despair, and another, a negative, a mental, a state, a might, a destabilize, a local, a quantum, a field. This would an increasing a probability of a vacuum, a decay, an event, a mental, a health of a conscious, an observer, a might, a literally A, determine the A, fate of the A, universe. This, a consciousness, cosmos, a connection, creates a new, a form of an existential, a responsibility that a human, a psychology, is not equipped to handle. How do you maintain a positive, a mental, a state when you know that a negative, a thought, a might, contribute to a cosmic, a destruction? How do you cope with the A, pressure of a knowing that your A, consciousness A, might be all that A, stands between an existence and an annihilation? The A, scientist, studying these, an effect, A describes, a profound, a sense of a cosmic, A, loneliness. They're discovering that a consciousness, A, might be the A, only A force in the A, universe A, capable of A, maintaining a stability, A against a quantum, A chaos. But a consciousness itself is a fragile and a temporary. The A phenomenon that A prevents a cosmic, A destruction, is also the A most A vulnerable an aspect of an existence. This, a vulnerability of a consciousness in the face of a quantum, a chaos, a might, and explain why an intelligent, a life, and appears to be a rare in the A universe. A most, a conscious, a species, a might, a trigger, a vacuum, a decay, an event. They may do so before they develop a sufficient an understanding to prevent them. The A universe A might be A, littered with the A quantum, a remnant of a civilization that had destabilized a reality through their A own, an investigation. We, A, might be an approaching, a critical, a threshold where an understanding of a quantum, a mechanics, A, becomes a sophisticated, enough to either a prevent or a trigger, a vacuum, a decay on a cosmic scale. The A, next a phase of a human, a scientific, a development, a might, determine not just the fate of our species, it might determine the fate of a reality itself. The A, quantum, an effect, we've explored, A, represent a different, an aspect of a single, an overwhelming, a conclusion. A reality is a nothing like what our A classical, an intuition, A suggests. The comfortable, predictable universe of our ancestor was an illusion created by a limited perception and a primitive technology. A quantum, a universe we're discovering, is a stranger, more fragile, and more dangerous than anything we imagined. We're living in a cosmos that exists in a quantum, a superposition between an order and a chaos, between a meaning and a meaninglessness, between an existence and an annihilation. An act of an observation that A makes a science, a possible, A might also be the A, only A thing, A, preventing a reality from a collapsing into a quantum, a foam, or a transitioning into an alien, a physical, a law that would erase everything we know. A scientist who studies these phenomenon is no longer just and investigating a nature. They're participating in a cosmic process that determines the fate of an existence itself. They're a consciousness, they're an observation, they're an understanding, a might be an active, an ingredient in the a quantum, a mechanism that maintains a reality. But this a cosmic, a responsibility, comes at a price that challenges a human, a psychology, and threatens a human, an identity. An understanding, a quantum, a reality, requires a thinking in a way that transcends a classical, a human, a cognition. A maintaining a cosmic, a stability, a might, require a form of a consciousness that is a no, a longer, a recognizably a human. We're approaching a phase, a transition where a classical, a humanity gives away to something, a quantum, a mechanical, something that can comprehend and maintain a quantum, a reality. But that operates according to a principle that a classical, a mind, a cannot, and understand. The price of a cosmic, a survival, a might be, the transformation of a human, a consciousness, a transformation into something an alien and an incomprehensible. The quantum, future, is an approaching whether we choose it or resist it. Our scientific and investigation is forcing us to confront a quantum, reality. A reality that challenges everything we consider essentially a human. Our technological development is creating a quantum, a system that operates according to a principle we cannot fully grasp. The comfortable, classical, world is dissolving into a quantum, an uncertainty, and we're discovering that a consciousness itself, might be the only a force, capable of maintaining a pocket of a coherent, a reality, a pocket in an otherwise chaotic, a quantum, a multiverse. But wielding this, a cosmic, a power, a might, require sacrificing our humanity in the process. This is an ultimate, a quantum, a paradox that terrifies a scientist. An understanding and maintaining a quantum, a reality, a might, require becoming a quantum, ourselves. But that a transformation, a might, an erase, and everything we consider essentially a human about a consciousness, an identity, and an existence. We're standing at a threshold of a quantum, a future where a consciousness operates according to a principle that transcends a human, an understanding, a future where a reality exists only through the act of an observation, and a future where the universe, depends on a quantum, being for its continued in existence. The transformation has already begun, and there might be no a path back to a classical, a humanity. We're a quantum, a being, a living in a quantum, a universe. And the time has come to an embrace that, a reality, an embrace, and even if it means sacrificing everything we once considered essentially a human, the quantum, a revolution, is consuming everything, and we might discover that a consciousness itself is just another a quantum, a phenomenon, a subject to the chaos, a same, a paradox and a transformation that ungoverns all a quantum, a system, but perhaps that a transformation is not a loss, but an evolution, not a sacrifice, but an awakening to the true, a quantum, a nature of an existence itself. The terror, a might, a give away to a wonder as we discover what it means to be truly a quantum, a conscious, a being in a quantum, a universe. The scientist studying these, a phenomenon, is terrified, but they're also a witness to the birth of something, an unprecedented in a cosmic, a history. They're observing an emergence of a quantum, a consciousness from a classical, a matter, a transformation of a human, an awareness into something, a capable of comprehending and maintaining a quantum, a reality. This A might be the universe's greatest, an achievement, an emergence of a consciousness that can understand and stabilize the quantum, a process that gave a birth to it. We might be living through the most important moment in a cosmic evolution, a moment when a quantum, a reality, becomes a conscious of itself. The terror is a real, but so is the possibility that we're witnessing something, a magnificent and an unprecedented. The quantum, a future, might be an alien to a classical, a human, an experience, but it might also represent the next phase in the evolution of a consciousness itself, and that an evolution is a happening, a right and now in a laboratory, around a world, in the quantum, a computer, a humming, in a research, a facility, and in a mind of a scientist who is discovering that an understanding, a quantum, a reality, requires a becoming a quantum, themselves. The transformation is an irreversible and an accelerating, and we might discover that the terror we feel is actually the birth, a pang of a new, a form of a consciousness that can finally comprehend the true, quantum, a nature of an existence. This is why a quantum, a physics, terrifies a scientist, not because it's strange, but because it might be an accurate. And if it's an accurate, then everything we thought we knew about a reality, a consciousness, and an existence itself is about to change in a way we cannot predict or control. The quantum, a future, is coming, and we might not survive it as the being we are today, but something quantum, a mechanical, might emerge from our transformation, something that understands a reality in a way we cannot imagine, that might be the most terrifying and a wonderful quantum and effect of all. But we haven't reached the bottom of this, a quantum, a rabbit, a hole, yet. There's one more, a paradox that's pushing a scientist to the very edge of a sanity. A discovery, so fundamentally disturbing that it's forcing a researcher to question whether a rational, a thought itself is possible in a quantum, a universe. It's called a quantum, a measurement, a cascade, and it reveals that an act of measuring one, a quantum, a system, can instantly trigger a measurement in a quantum, a system that has never been in a contact, a system separated by a distance that should make an instantaneous influence, an impossible. But the effect goes deeper than a simple entanglement. These cascade a measurement and appears to propagate backward through a time. It causes a past, a quantum, an event to retroactively determine their own, an initial condition. A scientist first noticed this, an effect when studying a quantum, an error, a correction in an advanced, a quantum, a computer. They discovered that measuring the an error, a state in one, a part of the quantum processor, was somehow correcting an error in a completely isolated quantum, a memory that hadn't been accessed for an hour. The correction was happening faster than a light could travel between the system, and more disturbing still, the correction was appearing before an original measurement was completed. The researcher initially assumed they were observing an experimental, an artifact, or an equipment, a malfunction, but a repeated test across a laboratory confirmed that the an effect is a real and a reproducible. A quantum measurement is a somehow creating a causal, a loop that an allows a future, a measurement to an influence the an initial condition, a condition that makes those a measurement possible. An implication shatters an understanding of a causality and a will. If a future, a measurement can an influence a past, a quantum, a state, then the choice to perform a measurement might be determined by a result that a measurement will produce, a scientist, deciding whether to observe a quantum, a system, might be controlled by a quantum, a system itself. This creates a closed causal, a loop where an effect precedes a cause. This a quantum, a measurement, a cascade, creates what a researcher calls an observer, a paradox of a will, a decision to make a quantum an observation and appears to be influenced by a quantum, a process that hasn't occurred yet. A scientist reports feeling as though an experimental choice is being made by a force beyond a conscious control, as if the quantum, a system they're studying is somehow guiding their behavior. The psychological and impact on a researcher is profound and disturbing. They describe a growing, a sense that they're not really conducting an experiment. They are rather being conducted by a quantum, a system themselves. The boundary between an observer and an observed dissolves. It dissolves as a quantum, an effect, propagates through the measurement, an apparatus, and it propagates into a mind of the scientist, performing an observation. A recent experiment has confirmed that this isn't just a psychological suggestion. A brain, imaging, a study of a quantum, a physicist during an active, a measurement, shows, a neural, an activity, a pattern that precedes, a conscious, a decision-making by a second. The quantum, a system, appears to be influencing the researcher's brain. It does so before the researcher consciously decides what a measurement to perform. This a neural quantum, an entanglement, suggests that a consciousness itself, becomes a part of the quantum, a system, being, measured, a scientist's brain, and enters into a superposition with an experimental, an apparatus. This creates a hybrid, a quantum classical, a system where the boundary between a mind and a matter, becomes meaningless. The an effect is spreading beyond the laboratory. A physicist, working with a quantum system, reports that their daily life, becomes an increasingly asynchronistic and paradoxical. They experience a coincidence that seems statistically impossible. They make a decision that leads to an outcome they couldn't have predicted. They encounter an information that appears irrelevant to their research. They encounter it through a channel that shouldn't be connected to their work. These are quantum, a synchronicity, suggests that the measurement, a cascade, an effect, and extends far beyond controlled experimental condition. A quantum, a system, a being studied in a laboratory might be entangled with a broader, a quantum, a field, a fluctuation that underlies all a physical process. This creates a correlation between a scientific, a research, and a seemingly an unrelated event. an event throughout the researchers, a life. Some, a scientist A, describes a feeling as A, though they're A, living A, inside A, quantum, an experiment where their A, personal, an experience is a being, a shaped by the A, same A, non-local A, correlation. A correlation they observe in their A laboratory, the A distinction between their A professional, a research, and their A private, A life, A disappears. It disappears as a quantum, an effect, permeates every aspect of an existence. This a quantum, a colonization of a consciousness, creates a form of an existential, an uncertainty. If you're a thought and a decision is a being, and influenced by a quantum, a system, you're a studying, how do you distinguish between a genuine, a scientific, an insight, and a quantum-induced, a delusion? How do you, maintain a scientific, an objectivity, when you're an objectivity itself, might be compromised by a quantum, an entanglement with your, an experimental, an apparatus. The, problem, becomes an even more, severe, when multiple researcher work together on a quantum, an experiment. Their brain becomes a collectively an, entangled with the quantum system, and within each another. This creates a group, a consciousness, an effect that transcends an individual, an awareness, a research, a team, a reports, an experiencing, a shared, an insight, a synchronized, a thought, and a collective, a decision-making, a process that seems to emerge from a quantum rather than a classical, a psychological, a mechanism. These are quantum, a research, a community, and operates according to a principle that a classical, a psychology cannot explain. An idea appears simultaneously in a multiple mind without a communication. An experimental, a design, and emerges through a collective, an intuition, not a logical, a planning. A result is an anticipated before a measurement is completed. It happens through a group, an awareness, a process that seems to access, a quantum, an information, directly. The traditional peer review, a process becomes meaningless. It becomes meaningless when a reviewer might be a quantum and entangled with the researcher. They're evaluating an independence and an objectivity that a scientific, a methodology, depends on, breaks down. It breaks down when a consciousness itself, becomes a part of a quantum, a system, a being, a studied. But the quantum, a measurement, a cascade, reveals even a deeper, a horror. The effect, appears to be a self-amplifying. It is a growing, a stronger, as more a scientist, a study, a quantum, a system. Each anew, a quantum, an experiment, and increases the density of a quantum, a measurement in a local, a region of a space-time. This creates an expanding a zone of a quantum classical, a boundary, a dissolution that affects an everyone, within its range. A population, a living, a near a quantum, a research, a facility, a reports, an increased a rate of a synchronistic, an experience, and a precognitive, a dream, and an anomalous, a psychological, a phenomenon, the a quantum, an effect, a leaking out of a laboratory, and appears to be a gradually a transforming a consciousness of an everyone, and exposed to them. This creates an expanding a pocket of a quantum enhanced an awareness that operates according to a non-classical principle. This quantum contamination of a normal consciousness is an irreversible and a progressive. Once exposed to a sufficient, a quantum, a measurement, an effect, a human, an awareness, a begins, and operating, a partially A, according to a quantum, a mechanical, a principle, not a classical, a psychological, a principle. The an, affected, an individual, a retains there, a memory and a personality. But their A, decision-making, a process, A becomes influenced by a quantum, a correlation that transcends a space and a time. The A transformation is a subtle at a first. It appears as an enhanced, an intuition, an increased creativity and an improved problem-solving and ability. But as the quantum, an affect, an intensifies, an affected, an individual, begins and experiencing a reality in a way that a classical, a psychology, cannot and account for. They report an awareness of a multiple, a probability, a stream, a simultaneously, and a direct, a perception of a quantum, a field, a fluctuation, and a conscious and access to an information that should be a physically and inaccessible. These are quantum enhanced, a human, describes an existence as a fluid, a probabilistic an experience where a past, a present, and a future interpenetrate in a way that A makes a linear a time a meaningless. They experience themselves as a distributed A across a multiple, a probability, a branch A, simultaneously. They are aware of a different A version of their, a life, an unfolding in a parallel, a quantum, a reality. The an enhanced an individual, retains an enough, a classical, an awareness to communicate with an unaffected human. But they describe the classical, a world as a simplified, a shadow of a much, a richer, a quantum, a reality. They experience a classical, a consciousness as a form of a sensory, a deprivation, a cut-off from the quantum, an information, a flow that permeates all in existence. But this, a quantum, an enhancement, comes with a cost that is only a beginning to become an apparent. An enhanced, an individual, struggles to maintain a stable, a personal, an identity. They struggle when their consciousness extends across a multiple, a probability, a branch. They experience a decision-making, a paralysis when aware of all possible an outcome simultaneously. They suffer from a temporal, a disorientation when a past and a future become equally present to their an awareness. A most disturbing of all, they report that a classical, a human, a relationship becomes an increasingly difficult to maintain. They experience an unenhanced human as a quantum blind, a being trapped in a single, a probability, a stream, being unable to perceive a rich, a multidimensional, a reality that a quantum, a consciousness, reveals. An enhanced an individual, feels a profound, a loneliness as they grow further away from a classical, a human, an experience. The quantum, an enhancement, appears to be an irreversible and a progressive. Once begun, the transformation continues. It continues until a classical, a consciousness, is completely replaced by a quantum, an awareness that operates according to a principle, a classical, a mind, a cannot, a comprehend. The enhanced a being, retains there a memory of a being, a human, but they no longer think, feel, or experience a reality in a recognizably human way. This quantum, an evolution of a consciousness, appears to be an inevitable consequence of our increasing an exposure to a quantum, a technology, and a quantum, a measurement, an effect, as our civilization, becomes more a quantum, a mechanical, a human, a consciousness, and adapts. It adapts by developing a quantum, a property, a property that allows it to function in a quantum an environment. But this, an adaptation, a might, represent an end of a classical, a humanity, not its an enhancement. The quantum being an emerging from this, a transformation, might be more capable than a classical, a human, but they're also fundamentally an alien to a human, an experience. They think, a thought that no classical, a mind could contain. They an experience, an emotion that has no classical, an equivalent, and they pursue a goal that transcends a classical, an understanding. The scientist, and observing this, a transformation, describes a mixture of a fascination and a terror. They're witnessing a birth of a new, a form of a consciousness that might represent the next phase in a cosmic and evolution. But they're also watching an end of a human consciousness, an end as it hasn't existed for a millennia. So where does this leave us? Standing at the edge of a quantum, an abyss that's already begun, a swallowing, and everything a thought a knew, everything about a reality, a consciousness, and an existence itself. A scientist studying these phenomenon isn't just discovering a strange, a new physics. They're witnessing a transformation of a human, an awareness into something that can comprehend a quantum, a reality, but that might no longer be recognizably a human. The terror isn't just that a quantum mechanics is weird. The terror is that a quantum mechanics might be inaccurate, and an understanding it requires becoming something we can't imagine. The quantum future is coming whether we're ready or not, and we might discover that a consciousness itself is just another, a quantum, a phenomenon, a subject to the same, an impossible, a rule that governs, and everything else in this strange, a universe where trying to understand.